If I accept someone's profession of faith, if that person claims to be a Christian, then what is my responsibility toward that individual? If you're accepting their profession of faith, then you need to treat them like Christians. I know way too many people who have a deep separationist, fundamentalist mindset at this point. And the idea is somehow they live in the two different worlds. On the one hand, they'll say, oh, I'm not saying this person isn't a Christian. But then on the other hand, they will treat them as if they are not a Christian. And they will say, no, I will not associate with this person. I believe I will be with them forever in heaven, but not here on earth. Now, don't get me wrong. There are appropriate fellowship and ecclesiastical distinctions. In other words, it's an appropriate thing for a church to say, this is where we stand. And so I don't think it would be right for me to be an elder in a Presbyterian church. And I don't think it would be proper to have a Presbyterian as an elder in my church. But man, let me tell you something. I'm far closer to the vast majority of my conservative Presbyterian brothers than I am to any liberal in any denomination at all. They're Christians. We have fellowship in the gospel. We can have a distinction when it comes to the fellowship in the local church. And the reality is, if you seek to pretend that you are reaching out to individuals and yet you have hatred in your heart toward them, guess what? They will be able to tell that. I remember very clearly the first year that we did the full-on outreach at the Mesa Easter pageant in Mesa, Arizona, to the Mormons. We were gathered the last night reviewing the week's events, and a police officer walked up to us. And he said, you know, I've been watching you all this entire week, and I wanted to thank you for the way in which you engaged in what you did this week. You were respectful, and I was really impressed with how you did things. So this was the 1980s. There wasn't any Twitter, there wasn't any Facebook, but we never referred to filthy Mormons. For example, every person I've ever trained to deal with Mormons will tell you this. I've always told everybody, you don't refer to Joe Smith. It's Joseph Smith. He was a false prophet. Yes, he was. But your goal here is to reach the Mormon person without putting any more barriers between the truth of the gospel and where they are than already exist. And if you just want to get all up in their grill, then go someplace else. You ain't working with us because you've got the wrong motivations. You've got the wrong reason for being there. Look, there's a huge danger that we are going to insert ourselves. We're going to let our anger, our pride, our arrogance. Look, I've seen it for years. People who just want to pull their theological sword and slice and dice people. And they think the more blood they have on the sword and the more guts laying on the ground, the better they've glorified God. Well, I'm sorry, that's not how the New Testament presents how we are to approach this issue. We, as redeemed sinners, reach out to other people hoping they will become redeemed sinners. That changes everything. Well, I keep saying we're going to go to a text of scripture here. Let's start with one we know. It is so important. Yes, it is the classicus locus of the whole concept of apologetics, but 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, sanctify Christ as, it's literally Yahweh. I'm not going to go back through my whole sermon on this. I've done it on the program many, many times before, but the fundamental emphasis here, the commandment is to set apart the Messiah as Yahweh in your hearts. Quotation from the book of Isaiah, and it's specifically about Yahweh, God. And so it is a demonstration, a recognition of the incarnation, who the Christ actually is. And so you're treating him as holy. You are recognizing who it was that came in flesh in your hearts. And so it's a daily thing, recognizing whose servant you are, his authority. He's the creator. He's the one who's made you. And so if you treat him as holy, this is going to change all of the priorities of your heart. It's going to change everything about who you are and how you respond to things. And only when you do that, then, are you in a position to being always ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. And what people have missed for many, 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 many years, I think, in the apologetics community, is we've sort of skipped over the who asks you to give an account. We're not getting people to ask us. We're out beating people over the head. And what this text is really about is if you're obeying the commandment that is found there, then the result is that's going to change your life and your attitudes and your response to tragedy and difficulty and things like that. And as a result, people are going to come to you and ask you for a reason for the hope that's within you. And as a result, you need to always be ready to give that defense for that hope that's within you. But if you are not sanctifying Christ as Lord in your hearts, if you're not obeying that first command, you've got no reason to be doing any of the rest of it. But then notice the rest of it. Yet with gentleness and reverence. Peter knows that he has to provide this information, but with gentleness, with meekness. He knows the human heart. He knows how easy it is for us to utilize these situations as an opportunity for self-promotion or for the expression of inappropriate attitudes and so on and so forth. So does that mean that every single time you're going to be milquetoast? That every single situation? No, of course not. I remember, let me give you an illustration. Unlike the vast majority of my critics who seem to know so much about this, I was in a mosque in South Africa doing the audience questions after a debate. And in this particular instance, there was a microphone set up. And this gentleman comes forward, and what I found very strange and somewhat unusual was he was wearing an FBI hat in South Africa. It's like, okay. And so he comes up and he sort of asks a rather cheeky question. And it was asked in a cheeky fashion. And I chose to respond in an equally cheeky way. Basically, he wanted to sort of throw a jab my direction, and I threw one right back at him. And he smiled. Obviously, that was the appropriate response to him, was to punch back, not in a mean-spirited fashion. There was no hatred, but I sort of bopped him on the nose for having tried to bop me on the nose. Well, the next night was another debate. This was at the University of Johannesburg. And there was a young lady dressed very similarly to those young Muslim women in that video, but she was much younger. And I've told the story about how she wanted to ask a question and we weren't taking questions. We just didn't have enough time to do it in that particular debate. So she came up to me afterwards, and just how my heart broke. She was such a beautiful young lady, and she had tears in her eyes, and she was saying, "Do not say three." And even though I had addressed all of that in the debate, it was just broke my heart to see this young lady who believes so strongly in what she believes, and yet has been led astray because the author of the Quran didn't understand what we were saying either. And so she was trying to talk to me. Well, some other Muslims sort of figured she was done, or just they weren't really showing her a lot of respect. And so they started jumping in over her. And while I'm trying to stop them, all of a sudden this strong voice behind me tells them all to shut up and let the girl talk. And I turn around, guess who it was? It was the Muslim guy in the FBI hat. And he had my back. And he is behind me, holding the other people in check and keeping the situation calm. So does gentleness and reverence means that there can never be a strong exchange? No. But it certainly means that the attitude that I go into that situation with is one of meekness. I am a redeemed sinner. Reverence for God, reverence for his truth, and reverence for the people that I'm seeking to reach. There's another reference I want to get to real quick here. Just the wisdom of the book of James. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. Just ask yourself, when you engage in almost any argumentation online, does that describe your attitude? You can only control yourself. You can't control others. And you know what? You might just have to walk away from things. And yes, you might get mocked. What's more important? Titus was told to remind them to malign no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing every consideration for all men. Those are pretty strong words that I think we need to consider. There's so many passages of scripture we could look at.